Welcome, this is a recorded session of the Post-Quantum Cryptography Conference of the PKI Consortium. This conference would not have been possible without our sponsors, PQ Shield, SSL.com, Entrust, Keyfactor, HID Global, and the organizational support of the Post-Quantum Cryptography Working Group of the PKI Consortium, and in particular, Entrust, Keyfactor, and Logius. Would you like to join the PKI Consortium? Go to pkic.org/join, or contact us if you would like to become a sponsor.
Okay, with that, I would like to welcome Bill Newhouse and Andrew Regenscheid from NIST on the stage. Who's going to start with? You will start. So let me introduce, actually you both, just to get started. So you're the Cryptographic Technology, or the manager of the Cryptographic Technology Group, right? And you're at NIST for over 15 years?
Yeah, I've been there 17 years now.
Wow. So that's good. You have seen a lot of transitions, including like from SHA-1 and...
Right, and as you noted, this is going to be a lot more painful than the SHA-1 to SHA-2.
Even more painful. Okay. That's not very very optimistic. But yeah, okay, but yeah, you're absolutely right. So you're currently leading the efforts in what NIST is doing for the transition to post-quantum?
Yeah, my group leads the development of our suite of cryptographic standards, including PQC, block ciphers, lightweight cryptography, and random number generation.
Well, I'm very interested to your update here. And Bill Newhouse, who was also at our conference in Amsterdam, you were the with the National Center of Excellence, Crypto Center of Excellence, right?
Indeed, yeah. I get the privilege of bringing together many collaborators with great expertise so that we can help to ease the practices and figure out what we need to do to migrate to the algorithms that Andy's team has standardized.
Yeah, so that's really okay. How are we going to address this? So we have the update where we're standing, and how are we going to deal with this? What is the practical way to actually go through this transition?
We have a slide for that. We'll go.
Oh, that's perfect. Well, I don't take anything further. So your slides seem to be on the screen. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, as we said, let's see if this works. My name's Andy Regenscheid. I lead the Cryptographic Technology Group at NIST. And as you can imagine, really the majority of my team's focus over the last 10 years has been focused on the threat that quantum computers bring to the public key cryptography in broad use. Now, unfortunately, we don't yet know, as we heard earlier this morning, when a cryptographically significant quantum computer will be developed, but we do know the impact that it's going to have on security and on the algorithms in broad use today. We do know that we'll have to move to new algorithms based on different mathematical problems that are hard on both classical computers and quantum computers. Now, luckily, PQC, post-quantum cryptography, has been a very active research field for the last 2 decades, building upon decades more of research in advanced areas of mathematics. And now this has really grown into a very, rich and diverse, research field with several different families of problems that we believe could lead to, secure and efficient public key cryptography. But of course, building trust and confidence in new cryptographic standards and analyzing new proposals for cryptographic algorithms is a very challenging process. And at NIST, we've found that, open processes, bringing together researchers from around the world are the best way to do that. So, starting back in really 2016 now, we initiated, the competition-like post-quantum cryptography standardization process at NIST. And now, after a great deal of, closer? All right, I can do that. After 6 years of public evaluation and 2 years of standardization, NIST has now released the first 3, or at least first 3 standards for post-quantum cryptography. These include FIPS 203, specifying the ML-Chem standard based on Crystal's Kyber. This is a lattice-based algorithm with good performance and a great deal of analysis supporting its security. For signatures, we have FIPS 204, the MLDSA standard based on Crystal's dilithium. This is from the same family of algorithms as Crystal's Kuiper. Also has good performance, great deal of analysis, but as we'll see, the public key and signature sizes are much larger than what we're accustomed to. So for use cases requiring smaller key sizes or smaller key and signature sizes, we've also announced our intent to standardize the Falcon algorithm within FIPS 206 as FNDSA. Now this standard is still under development, but we hope to have a draft out in the first half of this year. We also, as a conservative choice, have standardized the Sphinx Plus algorithm, a stateless hash-based signature algorithm in FIPS 205. This has very conservative security argument behind it, but really the signatures and signing performance are really much different than what we have today. Now, really, both of are really the three general purpose algorithms that we have here, chiefly MLChem and MLDSA. These are both based on structured lattices. We would like to see more diversity, to have other options in our toolkit that are not based on structured lattices, both for diversity of the security arguments as well as different performance characteristics. So many of you may be aware that we have the ongoing 4th round where we're still evaluating chems, where we continue to evaluate Bike, HQC, and Classic Michelise. There we hope to have an announcement on our plans for standardization on 1 or 2 of those in the coming months. We also have the on-ramp for new digital signature algorithms. I'm not going to talk about that too much today, but tomorrow morning, first thing in the morning, I'll be giving an overview of the candidates we have in that on-ramp signature process. Now, these new standards that we have, notably with ML, DSA, and Falcon, the performance characteristics are very different than what we use today with RSA and ECDSA. Computationally, it's not that different. They compare pretty favorably, at least when you're running on a large CPU. SLHDSA is a little different, with it has pretty slow signing performance. But that one aside, the real challenge is going to be with the sizes. As I noted, the sizes of public keys and signatures are in order of magnitude, more at times, 10 times larger than what we have with RSA or ECDSA. Even with Falcon algorithm, we see sizes that are, about twice the size as RSA 3072. And this is going to be a challenge given how we use signatures in network security protocols and applications. If you think about a protocol, you may only be doing, one chem as part of that negotiation, but you may be sending multiple signatures and multiple public keys as part of that process. So if you use TLS as one example of this, in a typical handshake, you might expect to see about 5 signatures and 2 public keys sent. And given the sizes that we see with things like, MLDSA, that adds up. Using the MLDSA 44, that can add up to nearly 15,000 bytes. Now, that doesn't break TLS, but at that level, it does start to have, it has a performance impact. And in fact, I think I saw at least 2 different presentations later on the agenda that's going to be looking at, the impact that post-quantum cryptography has to applications like TLS. So now is the time for industry and for standards organizations, to really understand what impact these new standards will have on their systems, on their protocols, on their applications, to see whether these are, some of these performance impacts are going to be acceptable, or whether they'll have to look at changing the way their applications, systems, and standards work to accommodate these new algorithms. Now, of course, we can't talk about implementation of PQC without touching on hybrid. When I talk about hybrid, I'm usually referring to using a cryptographic construction that combines a classical algorithm that may be vulnerable to quantum computing with a post-quantum algorithm, and combining them in such a way that as long as one of those algorithms remains secure, the scheme as a whole remains secure. Now, there's different reasons that you might want to do this. For confidence in one algorithm more than the other, or to meet regulatory requirements. And there's several different different models for how to do hybrid being discussed in standards organizations like IETF. But all of these different constructions do have a cost. They have a cost in terms of time, money, and effort at implementing it. Similar time, money, and effort at deploying that if you're a user, and also overhead in terms of the data that you're sending and the computations you're performing. But how much overhead and how much cost is going to vary wildly depending on the application and use case. Just as a high-level example, there's a huge difference between, say, doing a hybrid chem in an interactive protocol like TLS versus building, deploying, and using a hybrid PKI. So at NIST, we don't think we're in a position to give a generic recommendation for or against hybrid. We think this is something that each organization, each standards organization, or vendor should look at their use case, look at their needs, and make a decision on the trade-offs and the different options that they have available to them for building it. What we do want to do at NIST is make sure that our standards accommodate use of hybrid schemes, whether it's hybrid chems or different hybrid signature schemes. We already have some allowances within our standards to do that, and we continue to sort of coordinate with and watch the IETF process to look at where we'll need to provide additional guidance or additional accommodations to be able to allow hybrid. So looking ahead, the big challenge is going to be now with migrating our systems to these new post-quantum cryptography standards. Here, the US government has taken a very aggressive approach. A national security memorandum released in May of 2022 established the year 2035 as the deadline for transitioning most government systems to post-quantum cryptography. And for those of us that have lived through transitions like the SHA-1 to SHA-2 algorithm know that that's an aggressive timeline. But I think it's also driven by what we're hearing from experts like Scott in terms of what the threat is to threat that we're facing with quantum computers and the impact to our data. So when we think about how to kind of prioritize and manage that migration, if I get to the next slide. Which way? Oh, okay. Oh, no. Might be. I can keep going, but when you think about that, like the two things that you want to think about then is, how long does your data need to be protected? That's way ahead. So you got to think about basically, two major considerations are how long does your data need to be protected, and how long is it going to take you to migrate your systems. And for whether it's within the government or in the private sector, all of us have data that can have long data security lifetimes. And I think we just heard that we may, in some cases, already be in the zone where we are facing the harvest now, decrypt later problem, where the encrypted data could be harvested now and wait until a cryptographically significant quantum computer is developed. Now, when we think about things like PKI, though, PKI doesn't have that harvest now, decrypt later problem. But what it does have is the challenge that those kinds of systems that are so closely tied to our infrastructure are among the most challenging to migrate. And so that's where the urgency comes from here in terms of preparing industry and preparing our standards and technologies for this need to migrate to post-quantum cryptography. So in support of the US government's migration, last November, NIST released basically it's considered the deprecation plan for quantum vulnerable cryptography and draft NIST IR 8547. This document, is really intended to be the start of a conversation with industry around what we need, what we're going to need to do to transition our major IT systems to post-quantum cryptography by 2035. It identifies the existing quantum vulnerable standards that we have in our toolkit and identifies the new post-quantum standards. It re-emphasizes and enforces the NSM 10 deadline of transitioning most government systems to 2035, disallowing quantum vulnerable cryptography after that point. And also relaxes what had been kind of a long-term, security strength migration that was, tentatively planned for 2030. Basically, the transition or migration from RSA 2048 to RSA 4072-bit keys. What we're telling people now is, do that if you can, but really the focus should be on preparing your systems for adoption of PQC. So, if migrating to 3K RSA is going to be a challenge, going to cost money, it may be better to instead focus your resources on preparing for PQC. Now, as part of this, and this isn't new, but we do emphasize in NIST IR 8547 that at this time we do not see a need to disallow or migrate off the 128-bit classical security level for symmetric cryptography like AES, given the way that the attacks, those kinds of attacks scale on quantum computers. So this document, the comment period technically ended on January 10th. I will say, if you didn't get a chance to see this yet, you do have comments, feel free to send in comments and we'll try to take those into account as we finalize this document. But there is obviously a great deal of work ahead of us now in terms of migration. So I'll be turning it over now to Bill to talk about the activities at NCCoE.
So I have a hunch that last slide is going to be where the Q&A goes. So we'll be allowing enough time for that. I want to describe to you that we recognized at NIST, and my colleague Maruja Supaya and I are co-leading a project called Migration to PQC at a facility that NIST started over a decade ago called the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. It is an applied cybersecurity center. The name was given to us with the money by the person who gave us the money from Congress. So our goals in doing this were to complement the work that Andy's team has done internationally with everybody who submitted the algorithms to be considered. It is also to inform and support the U.S. government initiatives, because we are a U.S. government agency, a non-regulatory part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. We, at the center for all the projects we do, we have other projects in different technology areas and focus in cybersecurity. We involve and we include industry collaboration, and in this case, we definitely have government collaborators. And we're trying to bring awareness and thought leadership into this space because it is going to be such a large migration. It is already such a large migration. So I should look there, not there, because it's in front of me as well. So coordinating with standards development organizations is an obvious and necessary part of our collaboration, and we've been adding people to the collaboration because of who they've met through those processes. So that is a consistent part of it, and coordinating through industry and government is kind of obvious and necessary. So the important activities that we've started and are doing are the last two bullets on this slide. That we're looking to understand and learn and see what discovery and inventory tools can do for you, where they look, how they function, what kind of outputs they offer that you can then use to make prioritization and risk management decisions. And so that is called a work stream. So the second to last bullet is one of our principal work streams. And then the bottom bullet is the interoperability and performance work stream, where where those of you who put these algorithms into use in the communication protocols, in the technologies that you sell to your customers, you are the implementers, you're the ones doing that. You needed to come together with us, you wanted to come together with us to explore the interoperability and performance characteristics of these new algorithms. And so it's been a, this is why we exist and what we're doing. There we go. Dang it. Too fast, but that's my favorite slide, and I'll make you all say noisy stuff in a second. Let me show you where to go. Gosh, sorry about this, Sven. You did a great job getting us organized and turning these things in, and it's fighting again. Sven, can you just go back a slide? Do you have the up and down button, page up, page down? Because I think this is not doing so well. Well, with the overlapping stuff here, Andy often uses a slide to describe the process to do the standardization. Excellent process. The name Post-Quantum Cryptography came from before days back when cryptographers were getting together to say this is something we needed to do. I've built the nice green one at the bottom to say, look, we started asking people to join us for this work in 2021. It was necessary to get ahead of this because we don't know how long it's going to take. We don't know when that analytically relevant quantum computer is going to exist. So we started in 2021, and then in 2022, about 8 months later, we had 14 collaborators, and that's just because not everybody was paying attention, but 14 really great collaborators came to join us, and now we have over 40, and that's awesome, and I can't maybe take on 80 to 100, but we're going to keep adding people who can make impacts to those two work streams I just described, and so we are working on that now. We put out a publication a year ago, December, and we're going to refine that publication, make it easier to read, and start using our GitHub pages.nist.gov structure to share this stuff with you faster so that we can give you interim results, the results as they appear, rather than, hey, we got to get this through a publication. We have to ask all our collaborators to help us get it together and put it up there as a draft for you to make comments on. So we're going to improve how we get this stuff to you. But I wanted to point out that we've been doing this in parallel. Going to work? All right, next slide, please. Awesome. Okay, that's what this slide said. We're going to make it easier to read our papers. Boring. Next slide, please. Yeah, the collaborator. We're going to stick on the collaborator one, just because I want you guys to raise your hands online and in person. Can you get it? And and people might say, if we think we can do cryptography, man, this stuff, PowerPoints and everything else is interesting. Complexity. So this is our current list of collaborators. And by the way, just in the last 2 days, I added 2 more. The Army Public Key Infrastructure Office is joining us. That's kind of exciting. And Wells Fargo is joined. And what I want you to do in the room is, if you're already a collaborator and you're participating in our meetings, will you raise your hand? And if you're online and the system allows you to, make some noise. That's fantastic for me. If you're not on here, I know at some point you're going to say, Bill, how do I get on here? And I'm going to give you a long-winded answer that says maybe. But what this should have in here is diversity. This is a space that needs different sectors, different types of organizations to be part of it. And we're an applied cybersecurity lab, so there's some tactics here to have companies that can help us take outputs of things like discovery and inventory tools and make some early decisions about prioritization. We can only demonstrate that in a lab without any real threats, without any real traffic and data at a scale that's going to look great. But it involves the ability to show you the mechanisms of connecting these technologies together so they can function, and to provide opportunities for these folks who have joined us to pair up and partner up to work together. So it's a lovely list, and it will grow a little bit. We're not so elastic that I can have everybody in the country join us. We also have a community of interest. If you want to just keep track of what we're doing, we should be leveraging that, and we are leveraging that to share with you when we have papers, when we have workshops, and when we have activities together. So I'm grateful to all these folks. They've signed cooperative research and development agreements with NIST. Picture that NIST has a large technology partnership office, and sometimes we're in the queue behind people who are joining our CHIPS Act work. Sometimes we're behind the queue, meaning that the lawyers and the CRADA people have to also be working on things like our AI Safety Institute. So we beg for your patience, and sometimes it takes 5 months to get a CRADA done. Sometimes it takes 5 weeks, sometimes 5 days. So it's not that's just me airing dirty laundry. I shouldn't do that. Next slide. Good. Cool. Somebody standing on the data cable, would you lift your feet up? I don't think I have too much more. Hey, talk amongst yourselves. No, there we go. Okay, back. Well, this is the fact that the papers exist is a fact. I gave you an example on here. In our Zero Trust project at the center, we've now got a document that's like way shorter PDF, and it points to this website. It's pages.nist.gov, and that's going to be our elegant move forward. And my collaborators on the team have been saying, Bill, you've been saying that for 5 months. Show me some proof. But we're getting close, guys. We're getting close. We'll have this stuff in front of you in a much more easily digestible fashion. I want to point out that the work we're doing is little D's: demonstrate, document, display. Those 2 D's: demonstrate and document. Andy's work is big P, policy. And NIST has the responsibility for the crypto policy of the US government, the use of crypto for our non-national security systems. You'll have opportunities to hear from Morgan Stern from NSA, who has the same responsibility for our national security systems. And so, this is demonstrate and document. What we publish in these documents is not policy, but it will help you make the next right decision, we hope. So that demonstration part is important. Next slide, please. A little d, not big P. Remember that when you say, I have the answer for you, Bill. There we go, cool. So moving forward, these are the 2 work streams. At the top, we've expanded the protocols we're looking at. We did earlier tests with the non-standard algorithms, the drafts, excuse me. They were being standardized in spaces like playing with X.509 HSMs, using the interoperability of those, TLS, SSH, and now we're going to redo some of those tests as necessary to demonstrate that the finals algorithms perform just like we expected, because they didn't shift that much from draft to final. We are jumping into spaces, looking at PQC and hybrid modes of IKE2 in V2 and key exchange for VPNs, IPsec, DNSSec, smart cards. We're growing into the spaces that will be relevant to this PKI consortium for sure. And at the bottom, we've got a representation, a visualization that we hope to be able to explain. And when we show you the technology interactions of different aspects of this data you're managing and the tools you'll have and the risk management decisions you need to make. Note that box 5 says mitigation or migration. Don't think you have to migrate everything. You've already heard that from some, but people who read those short little articles in the really bad news feeds on the internet are thinking they have to swap everything out and the sky is falling. We can rationally get to what parts of the sky are falling and push those back up and keep it all working. So this is a tactic. We need to learn how to communicate in this way. It relates to at the bottom, we've got this word crypto agility. It's already been expressed in a couple different parts of the conversations, and it will come up again. NIST and Dr. Lily Chen, our NIST cryptographic fellow, she is going to document and put out an initial draft to say, this is how we'd like to define crypto agility so that we can be consistent in how we communicate with each other. So then in our lab environment, my collaborators and I, we can work together to figure out what can we demonstrate in crypto agility, and then what is other aspects of it that need to be focused on by different parts of our technology stack of people. So next slide, please. The cybersecurity framework gives us a language, blah, blah, blah. Next slide. And that language is important as we express this. This is a bigger version of that same picture I was just describing. So that language lets you connect up and down the C-suite in our vision of the world, and we have a govern function now in the cybersecurity framework. So govern is a big box in this space. So to figure out, this will help you also, if you're able to describe my role is related to one of these boxes, then you are going to be part of your quantum readiness team in your organization if your structure believes you need to create one of those, and that's a tactic. Next slide, please. Probably. I'll probably be handing back to Andy. I'll try one more time with this cool thing. That just probably messes you up, right, Sven? I'll stop using your name so people don't know you're the one back there going, crud. Okay, it is back to Andy. I'll be back for questions.
Thanks, Bill. So just to kind of wrap things up, I mentioned before that those first 3 standards from NIST, MLChem, MLDSA, and SLHDSA, were finalized last August as FIPS 203, 204, and 205. We are still working on the Falcon specification that will be in FIPS 206 as FNDSA, and hope to have that out, earlier this year. We're still in the process now of evaluating those remaining 3 candidates in the 4th round of the key encapsulation mechanisms. So we're still evaluating classic Michelase, BIKE, and HQC. We've had some recent results that we've posted on the PQC forum for those of you that have been following along that we're still interested in getting some feedback on, but ultimately hope to make a decision in the coming, I'll say, few months on probably the 1 or 2 algorithms out of these that we intend to standardize. In addition, we have an ongoing process to evaluate new digital signature algorithms that have been submitted to a process that started really in 2022. We got 50 submissions to that process. Just recently, we announced the 14 algorithms that will be moving on to the 2nd round. Now, we're we're both confident in the security of, FIPS 203, 204, and 205, but we do want to have this additional, these additional options, like I said, for diversity of security problems, as well as for different performance profiles for different use cases. But there isn't the same level of urgency in this as as the original process, because we have now MLDSA, which we think is suitable for really the vast majority of use cases. So this on-ramp process is going to take some time. We just started the 2nd round this year. We plan to start the 3rd round next year. If you want to hear more about these new digital signature schemes, you can come to my talk tomorrow morning. Next slide. There we go. There's a lot of activity going on, both at my team as well as within the testing group at NIST. We earlier this month we published SB 800-227 on recommendations for key encapsulation mechanisms. This is really kind of a set of guidelines on how to use chems in protocols and applications. This is also where we're addressing some of the issues and alignment concerns that have been raised as part of the adoption of hybrid schemes within IETF protocols. So please take a look at this draft while the comment period is open. We're also having a workshop at the end of February, a virtual workshop at the end of February, to dive into more detail about this. We're also, as I mentioned, releasing our, transition documents, including the NIST IR specifying that deprecation plan, as well as some related guidance now in documents like SB 800-131A, which sort of lays out, the algorithm and key size migrations within the NIST suite. And finally, I'll say, NIST is already testing these new PQC algorithms within the FIPS 140 process. I got to give a shout out to the great team over in the Cryptographic Algorithm Validation Program at NIST, led by Chris Seeley. They had testing ready to go the day that those new FIPS standards were finalized back in August. But, there's still a lot of work ahead of us in this migration. We have the algorithm standards now, but we're still working, obviously, on updating, those, important protocol standards and architecture level standards to build in support to use those new PQC algorithms. We're still, in many cases, waiting on broader support and adoption of, for those new algorithms and important cryptographic libraries, both at the software level as well as in the hardware that we use. Everything from, acceleration in the chips to, support for things like, MLDSA and the smart cards that we use within the federal government. We're still working on adoption in the software and systems that we use and deploy in our environments. And that's going to be a prerequisite, obviously, to getting those things deployed in our infrastructure and in operations. So all of this is going to take a lot of a lot of work. You know, as you're going to keep hearing, this is really likely to be the most challenging cryptographic migration that we've faced. So I think, you know, as we're doing this process, you know, this is also an opportunity to look at, you know, how can we lay a better foundation for, you know, how to make, you know, add agility to our systems to make future migrations easier. And with that, we have a related project at NCCoE looking at that.
Well, it's a cross-NIST project, and essentially this paper will be published soon as an initial draft, and it will, and I'm sorry, so many bits of text here, but again, I mentioned that Dr. Lily Chen, she's leading the effort in this paper. Maruja Supaya, myself, and Andy and others are part of it. But look at the discussion areas. You know, what are these spaces that we need to figure out and learn and talk about so we can talk about crypto agility? Those are all places where we want you to engage and join us. You know, there are other bullets of transition challenges and you know, some of the things. What can the security protocols be anticipating? I think you'll hear that in some of the other panels. So this is just keep your ears open for this paper, and then argue prolifically with us. And then, you know, and if you're already writing a crypto agility paper, I know the Financial Services ISAC had a paper coming out, and they're like, well, we don't want to mess up your paper. And I said, no, we have enough. There's enough room here for yours. It's specific to the financial services sector. It's relevant, and we should be able to, you know, map it back to these concepts. If it doesn't, then we've given you some more places to think about for gaps, or you might have given us places. So again, getting this in front of people so that we can then help to use this conversation to talk about our work. One of the roles I have in this project is sort of paying attention to all the federal pushes. There's a memorandum that came out in November of 2022 that said start doing inventories, federal agencies. And just being able to kind of normalize those conversations, it is feeling to me like for the US government, where FedRAMP now exists to help cloud providers describe their services and the security therein in consistent manners, ways. This is going to help us do that too. I'm not saying we're going to have a PQC ramp. You know, that's not even. I don't even know why it ended up being called FedRAMP, but it is valid. So that's one of the big birthmarks I have now, which says bummer of a birthmark Hal on it. But no, it's like, it just says, hey, come pay attention to me. I can help you connect with the people in our government who are working on this, and trying to communicate this stuff is going to be important. So next slide. That's working again. Somebody turned off the microwave, so now it's working. Everything we do at NIST is open and transparent. We're about to take questions. We'll leave this up here so you can have our contact information. There's places to join. The PQC forum, most of you are on, but if you're not, you should be on it. And Paul, you and Al, I have some questions for us to answer, yes?
Well, I definitely think so. At least we have a number of questions on the remote. I see a lot of people coming up here to run to the mic. It seems like we have a few minutes, so we can cover those questions, no problem. Let's start with a remote question, Albert.
Yeah, I have a question from GB Fisher. What is the position of NIST on hybrid cryptography?
I touched on this a bit, and there's also a panel going on later today they'll be speaking on with, moderated by Ralph Poor. But, this doesn't have a position, or at least our position is really that the, individual, that the system owners, the companies that develop applications and systems, the standards organizations developing protocols, really need to look at their own use case, look at the trade-offs that exist there and the requirements from their community, and decide whether or not hybrid constructions make sense for them. Our position at NIST is that we want to accommodate the use of hybrid schemes but within our standards, but we're not going to recommend strictly for or against their adoption.
Okay, and definitely good point on the discussion we have on this later, and maybe that would also give a little bit more of the insight. Like you might not have a position, but maybe some thoughts about, okay, what are you thinking about hybrid? And I think that could be a really interesting panel that we have later today. From the room.
Hi, Mike Ounsworth. Sasha, my question dovetails nicely on the last one and maybe generalizes a bit. I get a lot of, hey, CNSA hates hybrids, or I need a product that's CNSA 2.0 compatible, and I often say, why? Are you trying to sell it to NSA? If not, why did you read that document at all? So my question for you is, could you just expand on the difference between the NIST recommendations and the NSA recommendations, and who the target audiences of those two documents are?
Yeah. Well, NIST statutory authority within the US government is developing standards and guidelines for protecting non-national security systems. NSA is, on the other hand, through the Committee for National Security Systems, is responsible for developing the requirements and standards for national security systems, things like intelligence and I think weapons control systems, perhaps too. We have later on Morgan Stern will be talking from NSA about their requirements. So yeah, we do serve different parts of the community. I think. From this perspective, we know that we're all using ultimately the same sets of, commercial technologies and products and the same sets of, important network security standards, right? So it's in, I think, everybody's best interest to have a common set of, requirements, or at least be able to accommodate some common set of requirements so that the commercial sector has kind of a consistent thing to build to. So that's how we ultimately approach this from NIST. Like, we have this authority for the U.S. government, but we know that there is this I think interest in a broader need for requirements and guidelines that can apply across the broader ecosystem, because again, we're all using the same commercial products and standards. I think Morgan may be able to get into a little bit more when he gives his talk. Later on.
Yeah, that's a good introduction for after the break. So Morgan Stern from the NSA is talking after the break, but we will come to that later. Let's see if we have another question from the remote audience.
I have a remote question from Dave Wheeler, Amazon, for Bill. I understand NIST's position on deferring the decision to use hybrid approach to implementers. However, what data can NIST provide to aid implementers in estimating risk that PQC algorithms parameters may not be large enough to protect data for a sufficient amount of time? Given Koblitz's paper on the LWE parameters not able to set from the LWE proof, how does NIST suggest we as implementers approach estimated the risk? A very large question.
David, it said Amazon, and so Panos, is here in the room, and we can kind of throw that conversation at one of our workstream meetings to see how the room talks about it. Measurement of risk and things like that is we're a little bit not there yet as far as taking these to that. We're still working on the tactics of, hey, do we want to call that a cryptographic bill of material from the discovery tool? And then the measurements we've been doing in interoperability and performance have been expanded upon by individual researchers, which I think some of them will be describing that here. So that's a non-opinion opinion, and just an opportunity that we can take on the question again, but not answer it here. Andy's got an answer to add.
Yeah, I guess there's sort of two aspects to that I think were brought up in the question. One is kind of the risk based on the cryptographic strength of the algorithms, and maybe the second part around the cost of implementing hybrid. I'll repeat what I said when in my talk. Like, I think we are very confident in the security of the schemes that we selected. Now, it's hard, obviously, to predict what kinds of future advances in mathematical techniques may bring. But I'll note too that a lot of these metrics for security are kind of fuzzy to begin with. So I think it's really difficult to sort of both imagine what types of mathematical advances could come, or other risks with the post-quantum algorithms that may drive interest in hybrid. Yeah.
Briefly, I just want to add that bringing your risk managers into this conversation so we can make sure we're talking about the same potential for measurement or consistent conversation about it is something that I'm detecting as a bit of a gap.
Okay, so let's go to the next question from the room.
Question for Andy. Right now, NIST has approved classical algorithms for doing non-interactive key exchanges by doing Diffie-Hellman static. MLChem does not work in that mode. Does NIST have any plans to address that gap?
So, not any specific plans, but we're aware of that, and we're kind of expecting to see some comments on that as part of 800.227. I guess, are you looking to see some things filled in there?
I'm actually just looking for NIST plans.
Okay.
Okay, Albert.
I have a question for Andrew. What are some of the issues that NIST has experienced with Falcon?
Yeah, so I mean, as part of the development of this draft standard, we've been having, doing our own implementations, essentially looking for, challenges or any deviations depending on, say, the floating point units that are used. We've also been looking at, different techniques for, implementing it using, fixed point instead of floating point. I wouldn't say that we've hit any major major obstacles, but we do want to make sure, both that, be confident both in the security and the testability of the Falcon implementations, as we're developing that standard.
Okay, next question from the room, please. And feel free to queue up here. We do have a couple more minutes, so we do have a lot of questions remote. Please keep submitting them, pkic.org/ask, but floor is yours.
James with the street team at Curel. I was wondering what kind of work is being done to improve the signature aggregation for post-quantum cryptography.
So you mean coming up with schemes that can do signature aggregation?
Can reduce it, yeah.
Within an aggregated use case, or I'm not sure what you mean by that. But
Basically the size of the signatures on the cryptography.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you're just dealing with, one signature, I think this is probably mostly a reality that we're going to face with post-quantum cryptography, that the sizes of things are generally just bigger. I'll talk tomorrow a little bit about the on-ramp. There are different families that have, different performance and implementation characteristics. Things like the UOV family have very small signatures, but in return, they have very large public keys. For classic UOV, that's, public key on the order of a megabyte. And so, things like that might ultimately work for some niche use cases where the public key is, doesn't change very often, and things like maybe GPS. But it's usually going to be the combination of the public key plus the signature that's going to drive the suitability of algorithms and schemes. And there, I think on that metric, it's really hard to beat things like MLDSA.
Thank you.
Okay, then we go back to the remote questions.
Yeah, we got a lot of remote questions. But first of all, Andrew, can you talk a bit about the status of expanding the cryptographic module validation to include PQC implementations?
Yeah, so I mean, adopting PQC within the FIPS 140 testing program really didn't require any dramatic changes, at least to our process at NIST. The FIPS 140 standard itself largely refers to security requirements for the cryptographic module, the hardware, software that are generic to the algorithms that are being used. So, really the big piece that we had to address with FIPS 140 was just getting the algorithm testing out once the standards were available. And there I said, the algorithm testing team at NIST did a great job of getting those, getting those algorithm standards or that algorithm testing out at the same time as the standards themselves.
Okay.
So I kind of assume that NIST is rightly focusing on what I'll call the big problem. So dealing with this migration in servers and PKI and PCs and phones, places where resources are, to my way of thinking, unconstrained. How aware and concerned at this point are you all about embedded applications? So door locks, medical sensors, light bulbs, those types of things that have not only additional resource constraints, right? I'm not running any of this in software on that type of stuff, but also problems like if you want that stuff to migrate in 2030, the vendor of the vendor of the vendor has to start working on that 2 years ago. Like, where is that in your headspace, and are you guys aware of that?
Yeah. Well, the answer is very. And in particular, I guess the main example that I'll point to there is, as many of you might know, the US government uses a smart card-based credential called the PIV card to do logical and physical access, right? And, I think looking at how we will adapt the PIV infrastructure and those smart cards to the PQC algorithms is top of mind. One of my roles at NIST is working on those PIV card standards, and we're in the process now of developing kind of the roadmap for PQC. A challenge in cases like that is that there's a lot of things that have to happen before you can before something really becomes deployable, right? We have foundational standards, levels upon levels of standards within ISO and NIST and ANSI covering those, covering the different communication protocols, both the cryptography and just the interfaces. You have the hardware themselves, the chips, that are ultimately going to require, changes to the hardware to support hardware acceleration to make those things, efficient enough to actually do, not just for speed, but also because of power. And then there's, elephants in the room, like, some of those interface speeds are hard to change. The interface speed between a smart card and your computer, or your, payment card, your NFC payment card, and the terminal at the retail store is pretty slow. And, that's where you're going to see these larger signature and key sizes really become a problem. I suspect that some of the techniques and types of protocols that we use in those environments are not going to work with a simple drop-in replacement of MLDSA in place for ECDSA or RSA. Right? I think at times there'll be some more fundamental changes that are needed. You mentioned the kind of the timeline then for migration, and I think that's going to be difficult. I think 2035 is again the goal for most government systems. I think we're going to have to look more closely, particularly between now and 2035, at providing more detailed guidance for specific applications to either at times move it up. Cases like maybe you probably don't want to wait until 2035 to do adopt PQC in your TLS traffic. But also, look more carefully at where the state of technology and standards are to decide where some of those IoT use cases fall. Because I don't think necessarily that the risk is always at the same level.
So in the two work streams we have, there's the notion of demonstrating particular use cases for the discovery tools in particular. Trying to look into these systems will be a challenge. And even if when we do that, getting that in front of you so you can say, oh, okay, that one more thing on my list that people might not have been thinking about. So as you're participating in the next 2 days, if you think of things you'd like us to try to experiment on in our lab, please share them with me, share them with the collaborators who are involved with us already, because we'd like to at least put it on our list. It might end up as number 40, and we're doing the first 10 use cases right now, but that's our intent, is to try to tackle things like that.
Okay, well, that sounds good. Albert, do we have any remote questions?
Lots of questions, but here's one for Bill. What are your thoughts, recommendations on usage of stateful hash-based algorithms for digital signatures versus stateless, especially for embedded systems where public key size and signature size are big constraints?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. I mean, so I didn't touch on this within my standards, but this, within our suite of algorithm standards, we have SB 800-208 specifying the LMS and XMSS stateful hash-based signature algorithms. Now, as probably many of you know, NIST from the start of that has been very concerned about the difficulty of securely maintaining state, right? As probably most of you know, right, the concern is if you end up, essentially those schemes work by having a set of one-time signing keys. If you reuse one of those signing keys, you lose the security of the system. So that makes it very important to essentially keep track of where you are within that set of one-time signing keys. So we've primarily looked at those stateful hash-based signature schemes as more of a stopgap measure for moving on to the more, I'll say, resilient signature algorithms like MLDSA. That being said, I think we do know that they have. I mean, they're great tools, right? I mean, and I think they do have a longer term role for niche use cases where it may not be practical to use things like MLDSA. So we've heard loud and clear from the community that some of the requirements that we place on stateful hash-based signatures around state management really makes them nearly impossible to use according to our standards. Effectively, the NIST requirements prohibit duplicating or backing up keys to other modules. So we are working on addressing that, but again, I think our thought is really that's really more for the niche use cases. I guess the two other alternatives is the general purpose signatures like MLDSA, as well as the stateless hash-based signatures like Sphinx Plus and SLHDSA. There's, I think in some of those use cases, the sizes of those in those cases is going to make it challenging to use in certain environments. One of my colleagues at NIST, Quinn Dang, and I was working with Scott Fleur, who I saw in the audience, on essentially different parameter sets, to support a smaller number of max signatures, which would allow some different performance trade-offs there that might make those practical in a broader range of use cases. But again, I mean, what our focus really on is still primarily pointing people to MLDSA.
Okay, thank you for answering that. And another question from the room.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned, so the deadline for migrating to PQC in the USA is 2035, and you mentioned it's already a pretty tight deadline. Also, NIST is disallowing RSA and ECC by 2035. And my question is, with the experience that you also built with the NCCoE, if you can share, do you have reflections, comments on other countries having an even tighter deadline to migrating?
Well, so I mean, I'll largely leave that to the countries to speak for themselves. I mean, we've been coordinating closely with partners, around the world, talking about our post-quantum migration plans as well as theirs. In general, I think where the U.S. is a little bit out ahead in front of most countries, but where we see the timelines that have been announced, particularly in Europe, that 2030 to 2035 zone is consistent. Like we see that both in the U.S. and in Europe. I think there's alignment roughly.
Okay, Albert, the last question from remote, and then we take the last question from the room, and then we're top of the hour.
Sure. Andrew, a question from Madi. Can we review the performance analysis of each PQC algorithm in every NIST round? Are they accessible to the public?
The performance?
Yeah, performance. The performance analysis.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll say we largely rely on the benchmarking efforts of the community at large to do those, to do those analyses. Pulling from websites like the PQ that have consolidated that information, as well as EBACs. I should caveat things, right? As when you're earlier in a competition, like that, whether it was in the original process or now when we're looking at the on-ramp process for digital signatures, the quality and optimization level of different algorithms is going to vary wildly based on the team that was developing those. So that honestly makes apples to apples comparisons of different algorithms very challenging, because we often know that you're not necessarily getting all the performance you can out of those implementations.
Okay, so that brings us to the last question from the room.
Well, thank you for saving the best for last. I wanted to understand what's NIST's stance on QRNG and standardization, or are you planning on expanding SB 890A as far as entropy sources?
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, we view things like the quantum sources like that as fitting into the 890 series as noise sources or entropy sources. And in that case, we have essentially a suite of statistical tests in 890B that could conceivably be applied to those. But that's ultimately how we see them fitting in right now. We still think that we have our construction of a noise source feeding into a DRBG ultimately before using it to generate keys.
Gotcha. Is there a roadmap for it? I haven't seen anything.
Well, I mean, I think the comment period is now closed, but I think one document to take a close look at is 890C. So within that suite, 890A is like the DRBG algorithms, 890B is the testing for the entropy sources, and C is the kind of overall constructions that we have for that. And
I'll just add that within our collaboration, questions like this come up, and we may not take it on as something we're going to publish as a little d, but groups have formed, and Philip Kwan, he wanted to get people together, talk about the API structure of doing the QRNG and cloud installation, so that's a conversation that has moved on its own forward. So that's a nice thing about any collaboration, is it lets us ask questions of more people and see if somebody else has got a good idea. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I would like to thank you for having this presentation and the update.